pale blued upholstery tacks, and I begin by setting the canvas in the center of each edge. And what this does is create effectively a diamond in the center of the canvas that is already taut. And this means that if there is any slack that needs to be dealt with, any planar distortions, I can move them to the corners and pull them tight. Ultimately, when I do key the stretcher out, the keying effect will be most dramatic at the corners. So if there is any slack, that's where I want it to end up. Now here, I'm just using my hands to add tension to this canvas. Using the canvas pliers isn't really necessary, and because this canvas is pretty old and brittle, I don't want to put any unnecessary pressure on it and potentially tear it. So I've skipped through all of the tacking because you've seen it all before, and I'm on to the finishing, where I will cut the canvas, I will fold the corners in, and use a lighter weight tack to adhere the excess strip lining to the back of the canvas. Some conservators prefer to cut this off. Some conservators do the ghostly, ghoulish thing of gluing it down. I prefer to use tacks because it's efficient, it's easily reversed, and I think it looks nice. And, you know, it's my studio and I get to make those decisions. Lucky me. So once I've gotten all of the tacking edges down and the corners folded, I can add the keys. And I had to cut new keys because there were no keys that came with this painting. The keys are interesting. They allow us to add tension to the canvas, but we're not looking to make it tight as a drum. We're just looking to add a little bit. You can see I barely tap it out. Maybe a 16th or even a 32nd of but that's enough because I've added most of the tension during the stretching process. The keys just take up any slack that I couldn't give. And of course, these keys get tied into place with a little bit of fishing line and another tie. And this ensures that not only are they not lost, but if they become loose through movement over time, they don't fall down in between the canvas and the stretcher bar, creating a distortion on the front. And now I can turn my attention to the front and start filling in the gaps. Even though I cut an inlay, there are still areas where there was paint loss. And I'm going along with a water-based fill-in medium and just kind of filling in the entire area, making sure that all of the divots and voids are filled in. I can use a silicone spatula to sculpt some of those divots to match the canvas texture, which will be necessary because this canvas is very textured, and the retouching, even if the color is matching, the texture needs to match too. Once all of that fill-in is dry, I can come back with a little cotton swab and remove the excess. Nothing fancy here. I'm just pulling off all of that extra fill-in that I put on. But this is important because I'm only allowed to retouch where the paint is missing. I don't want to blend in or glaze in over this whole area. That would be a witchcraft, voodoo type of retouching. If we take a look at the back of the painting, we can see the fill-in medium has oozed through and wrapped around some of those bridging areas. This is much like an old plaster and lath wall, where the gaps in between the lath allow the plaster to squeeze out and key itself in, thus making a tighter bond. I'm using the same technique here. A good conservator will always steal techniques where they can benefit the painting. Now, even though this painting does not have a ton of retouching, we just can't leave it without it. That would be, well, haunting. So I'm going to retouch the painting, and I'm using specific conservation paints. They're made of ultrafine, high-quality powdered pigment suspended in a synthetic resin that is soluble with a deliberate solvent. This means that in the future, if it ever needs to be removed, unlike oil paint, which oxidizes, polymerizes, and becomes, well, permanent, this paint can be removed. It is reversible. This is not a terribly complicated area of retouching. This zombie green, if you will, is relatively straightforward, but it still takes a little bit of effort to blend the color and then work it so that there are enough color variations so that it doesn't feel or look like one blob of color. Even in a field of one color, there are subtle differences, and those are what help your eye focus over the retouching instead of pause on it. Now the retouching dries a slightly different color than when it's wet, and it looks wrong. But when we varnish it, it will transform back into its wet look state, and it will blend in. This is one of the difficulties of using this paint, is that it looks fine, and then it dries and it doesn't. And so you're tempted to keep working it over and over again. And it takes a little while to adjust to that, but once you get it, it makes sense. And then you can move fairly fluidly, having confidence in the work that you've just done. Now, spending time retouching a painting is always fun, unless the painting is this one, and looking back at you from the netherworld. So luckily, there wasn't a ton of retouching, and I can move on to the varnishing process. And I'm excited to see what happens to this painting when I get to varnish on it. Dark paintings generally respond to varnish really well. The colors get rich and inky and dense, and they become full and vibrant, alive, even on a death-like painting. The varnish that I use is a synthetic resin varnish developed by aesthetic conservators. Unlike a natural resin, this isn't going to yellow or darken or become brittle or difficult to remove in the future. And it has an ultraviolet stabilizer in it, which will protect not only the paint from ultraviolet light, but also the varnish. Now, varnishing is one of those things that confounds most artists, but there's nothing to it. Saturate a brush, apply it one direction, apply it the other direction, and then work it back and forth. Now, sometimes on a painting, I will brush out the varnish as it dries, but I gotta wait till it dries. So a little time on my phone, and then I start to brush out the varnish. And as the solvent is evaporating from the varnish becomes sticky and tacky, and I can start to add micro texture to the finish, which will create a really beautiful Here it is. A hauntingly beautiful painting by a man who had no charming temperament, was a little and was a soul seeker. Fitting if I do see so myself. Tears and holes have been mended so that they are invisible from the front. The painting has been cleaned so that we can actually conceive this image. All of the distortions have been removed and the retouching executed to a level where it is completely invisible, which is, of course, what we want. Tacking edges have been repaired and replaced so to provide better structural support, and the entire back of the canvas has been preserved, keeping the signature and the date visible for the future, something critically important for the provenance. And the repaired stretcher bar, well, it looks just like it should, completely invisible. But what is visible is a signature that was completely obscured before. And so here, as we take a look at this ghostly, haunting painting, with its zombie-like greens and morose finish, it's compelling. But in the sort of train wreck, can't take my eyes away from it kind of way. I'm not sure if I'd like it. I can't stop looking at it. And so, while we have brought the painting out of the darkness, now that we can see it, maybe we put a little darkness into it.